You have a whole theory about how your life is going to go. Mine was simple. Work, save money, maybe one day keep a houseplant alive past the second week. Love? That was a variable I had crossed off the equation a long time ago, with the calm of someone removing something that never really worked right anyway. Not bitterly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you stop buying something at the grocery store after a while because you stop needing it, and eventually you stop remembering you ever did. I was good at my life. That's the thing people don't understand when they hear this story. They assume I was lonely in the obvious way, the messy way, the kind that shows. I wasn't. I had friends I liked and work I loved and a neighborhood in Portland. I knew well enough that the barista at the coffee shop on my corner started my order when she saw me come through the door. I had a life that fit. It just fit like a room that's been packed too carefully. Every box in the right place. No space for anything new. And then a dog appeared. At 10:43 p.m. on a Thursday in November, I was walking home from work with 2 years of carefully packed life and a bag of instant ramen hanging from my wrist. Outside, Portland was doing the thing it does in November. Not really raining, not really not raining, just existing in a state of perpetual damp that residents learned to stop mentioning. And in the middle of the sidewalk, 2 blocks from my building, standing in that drizzle with an expression of profound philosophical regret, was a golden retriever wearing a tiny navy blue bow tie, soaking wet, looking directly at me, with the specific energy of someone who has made a series of poor decisions and arrived at the inevitable consequence and would very much appreciate not being judged for it. I tried to pretend I hadn't seen him. I took 3 steps. I turned around. Because he was ridiculous and adorable and clearly lost, and I am the kind of person who lies to herself about being indifferent, but turns around 3 steps later in the rain for a dog in a bow tie. It's a flaw. I've made peace with it. He had no collar, no tags, no chip information I could read without a vet. Just the bow tie. Dark fabric, navy blue going almost black in the wet, the weave slightly worn at the knot, like something used often and put on with care. Not a costume piece, not a joke. Someone had put that bow tie on him deliberately, probably that morning, probably while he sat still for it because he'd done it before. That told me something about his owner before I knew anything else about her. I crouched down. He sniffed my hand for approximately half a second and then put his entire wet head against my palm like we had an established relationship, and he was simply reminding me of it. "Okay," I said to the empty street. "Okay." I took the dog home. That was 3 weeks ago, and I still can't entirely account for the sequence of events that one ridiculous bow tie put in motion. But I'm going to try. Before we get into this story, and I promise it's worth every minute, if you just found this channel, stay. This is where these stories live. Subscribe, hit the bell, because what comes next in this story will change the way you think about the things that look like accidents. And tell me in the comments, have you ever turned around for something, or someone, you probably should have walked away from? I really want to know. My name is Lina. I'm 28 years old, and I work as an assistant editor at a small literary press in Portland called Meridian Books, the kind that publishes fiction in print runs my boss describes as intentionally modest, and that I would describe as quietly terrifying. We have 6 employees, a building that smells like old paper and someone's perpetual chai, and a reputation in certain circles that I am unreasonably proud of. I like the work with the specific intensity of someone who found the thing they were supposed to do young enough to feel lucky about it. There's a pleasure in reading manuscripts at 2 in the morning, coffee gone cold, building quiet, and finding a sentence so good it makes you set the pages down and just sit with it for a moment. The kind of sentence that says something you felt but never had the words for. I live for those sentences. I have a folder on my desktop of nothing but sentences I've found in manuscripts over the years, saved like pressed flowers. I'm telling you this because it's important for what comes later. The way I pay attention to language, the way I listen for what's underneath what's being said, What I don't love is the apartment after work. My apartment is efficient, functional. It has exactly everything I need and nothing I want. I bought every piece of furniture with the same logic: durability, practicality, reasonable price. The couch is a sensible gray. The desk is solid wood because solid wood lasts. There are no photos on the walls. I keep meaning to hang some and keep not doing it, which I think is its own kind of message to myself that I've been ignoring for 2 years. It's an apartment that says, "Someone organized lives here," without revealing anything about who that person is when she stops being organized. I know exactly why this apartment is the way it is. I've known for a while now. It has to do with Claire. Claire and I were together for 3 years. We met at a reading at Powell's, which is such a Portland origin story that I'm almost embarrassed to tell it, but it's true. She was in line behind me for the author's signature, and she said something smart about the book, and I turned around, and that was that. 3 years of a good relationship. Not perfect, good. The kind that functions and feels real and has its own language and its own rituals, the kind you assume will just continue because it always has. She left 2 years ago, not dramatically, which was almost worse than drama, I've decided. It was gentle, the most polite conversation of my life, and the most devastating. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the solid wood table that I still have, and she told me calmly and with what I now recognize as real kindness that she couldn't keep doing this. I asked what this was. She said I had built a version of myself so well adjusted, so contained, so efficient, that there was no longer room for another person inside that version. She said it wasn't that I didn't love her. She believed that I did, but that I had learned, somewhere along the way, to keep the love in a place where it couldn't disrupt anything, and that she needed to be with someone who let love disrupt things. I disagreed at the time. I had what felt like excellent counter-arguments. I spent the next 2 years coming home to silence in an apartment that, piece by careful piece, proves she was right. The dog's name was Biscuit. I found that out the morning after I brought him home, when I was taping flyers to every surface that would hold tape in a 4-block radius. The coffee shop window, the corner market bulletin board, the fence outside the elementary school. The laundromat, where a woman folding enormous amounts of floral fabric looked at the photo and said, with genuine feeling, "Oh, what a handsome boy! Found, male golden retriever, approx. 2 to 3 years old, navy bow tie, friendly, no collar." I included my number. I took a photo of Biscuit asleep on my comforter, spread-eagled, completely boneless with contentment, because I felt that accurately represented the situation. 3 days passed. No calls. Biscuit stayed. He had a specific way of sleeping that I found simultaneously hilarious and unsettling. All 4 paws in the air, belly exposed, completely surrendered to the universe. No self-protection at all. I'd stand in the doorway watching him and think, how do you do that? How do you just decide that everything is fine and go completely limp? I hadn't slept like that, fully, without some low-level vigilance, in longer than I could remember. He also had opinions. Strong, silent, extremely communicated opinions. If I sat on the wrong end of the couch, the end that was apparently his end, he would sit directly in front of me and stare until I moved. If I worked too late, he would come and put his chin on my knee and look up with the particular expression of someone who is not going to say anything, but would like you to know that they have noticed the time. If I forgot to eat dinner, he somehow knew and would sit next to the kitchen with such pointed expectancy that I would get up and make something just to resolve the situation. By day 5, I knew which end of the couch was his. By day 7, I'd bought breed-specific food for golden retrievers without quite realizing I'd made a decision about that. By day 10, I came home from work and said, "Hey, Biscuit," to the empty hallway before turning on the lights. and then stood there for a moment because I had said something to the apartment, which was not something I did, and it had worked, because he came running from the back bedroom like I was the best thing that had happened all day. Which, for him, I probably was. That trust. That complete, entirely unearned, wholehearted trust. It unsettled me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. I had done nothing to deserve it except show up and feed him and wash his bow tie. And yet, it was on day 12 that my phone rang. The voice was low, measured in the way that things are measured when the measurement is costing something. Not emotionless, the opposite, actually. It was the voice of someone containing a great deal in very little space, the way you contain water in cupped hands. You found a dog, golden retriever, navy bow tie. It wasn't a question. I did, I said. 12 days ago. 3 seconds of silence. I counted them. 12 days. She said it the way you repeat something when the math doesn't quite work out to what you were hoping. A pause that had texture. I'm sorry, I was at the hospital. My mom was admitted the same day he got out. I didn't see your flyers until yesterday. I had so many questions. I asked only one. Is your mom okay? It came out before I could decide whether it was appropriate. Another pause, shorter. She will be. I'm glad. A beat. Then, can I come by tomorrow morning? I looked across the room at Biscuit, who had placed his chin on my left foot with the settled certainty of a creature who has identified the exact right place to put his head and intends to stay there. His eyes were closed. He had no idea his life was about to change again. I wasn't entirely sure mine wasn't either. I told myself that was a ridiculous thought. Of course, I said. 8, okay? 8 is good. I hung up. Biscuit opened one eye. She's coming tomorrow, I told him, with more steadiness than I felt. It's fine. It's fine was a 2-year-old lie that I'd gotten very good at telling, in the same tone, with the same conviction. I recognized the taste of it. He went back to sleep. She knocked at 8 o'clock exactly. I'd slept badly, something I wasn't going to examine too closely. I'd told myself several times throughout the night that the feeling in my chest was just about the dog, just about having had him for 12 days, just about the entirely normal human response of getting attached to an animal you've been taking care of. It wasn't about the voice on the phone. It was absolutely not about the voice on the phone. I opened the door. She was wearing a worn black Carhartt jacket, the kind that's been through enough actual work to earn its distressing. Dark hair cut bluntly to her jaw. Not styled, just cut. The kind of under eyes you get from a week of hospital chairs and bad coffee and sleeping in clothes you didn't plan to sleep in. Her hands, I noticed her hands before anything else, somehow, had the texture of someone who works with them. Small, pale scars, a callus on the inside of her right thumb, nails cut short and free of anything decorative. But what stopped me wasn't any of that. It was that she was clearly holding the face she wanted to show together with both hands, the way you hold a cracked thing that you're not ready to set down. Firmly, practiced, and in the 2 seconds between when I opened the door and when she registered that it was open, that brief moment when she was still just standing outside in the morning cold, I saw the face underneath the one she was holding. She'd been afraid that Biscuit wouldn't still be here, that I would have taken him to a shelter or rehomed him or decided after 12 days that she'd forfeited something. Then Biscuit came rocketing out from the back of the apartment, nails skidding on the hardwood, and the face she'd been holding so carefully came completely apart. She dropped to her knees right there in my doorway, and he nearly knocked her over, and she put both arms around him and buried her face in the fur at his neck. And I took a quiet step back and looked at the middle distance and gave them a moment. Not out of awkwardness, out of the sense that some reunions deserve the dignity of not being observed. When she stood, the composure was back, fast, the kind of fast that comes from long practice. She brushed her jacket off, cleared her throat once, and looked at me with dark eyes that were doing a lot of work. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to keep him this long. He's good company." Something moved in her expression. Not quite surprise, more like the recognition of something she'd suspected but hadn't confirmed. She looked at the apartment briefly, at the dog bowl visible in the kitchen, at Biscuit standing at her knee with his whole back end moving. "I'm Dora," she said. "Lena." "I know. It was on the flyer." A pause. She looked back at me. "I owe you something. For the food? For your time?" "You really don't." "I do. Not argumentative. Just certain. The kind of certainty that comes from a very specific place. I recognized it because I had a version of it myself. The certainty of someone who has gotten very good at not needing things from other people, which means that when other people do things for her, the debt feels enormous and must be addressed immediately, or it becomes unbearable. "Okay," I said, because I understood that pushing back would only make it worse. "If you insist." "I do." She scratched Biscuit behind the ear once, the specific spots. I noticed. She knew exactly where. And then she looked up at me again, and there was something almost like relief in her eyes. "I'll be in touch," she said. She took Biscuit home. I stood in the doorway of my apartment for a moment after they left. The hallway smelled like cold air and faintly like something I didn't have a name for yet. I looked at the empty spot on the floor where his bed had been. I looked at the dog bowl in the kitchen that I hadn't moved yet. "It's fine," I thought. I was getting very tired of that particular lie. Dora came back that same afternoon. I was at my desk with a manuscript I wasn't really reading when I heard the knock. She was standing in the hall with an envelope and Biscuit sitting at her heel with the composed posture of a dog on his best behavior, which I had never once seen him exhibit in 12 days. "Show off," I said to the dog. He wagged once, dignified. Inside the envelope was cash, the exact price of 2 bags of the good grain-free food she'd apparently researched online, and a handwritten note on a torn piece of brown paper bag, the kind of paper you find in a workshop. The handwriting was precise without being pretty, economical. "For your time and for the bow tie you washed, thank you for not taking it off him." That last line. I read it twice. Then I folded the note carefully and put it in the drawer of my work desk, between the manuscript I was supposed to be reading and a folder of saved sentences. I didn't examine why I was keeping it. Some things you file before you understand why. It wasn't the money. It was the detail, the fact that she'd noticed, that of all the things to remark on, she'd chosen the bow tie. She'd come home after a week of hospital visits and a missing dog, and the first thing she'd registered was that someone had taken the time to hand-wash a small piece of dark fabric and tie it back the right way. I thought about that for longer than was reasonable. I ran into her at the coffee shop 11 days later. I know the exact number because I'd stopped keeping track. After 5, and then found myself keeping track again anyway, which told me something I wasn't ready to hear. She was at the counter ordering when I came in, and Biscuit was tied to the bike rack outside with that absurdly upright posture, spine straight, head level, like he was posing for something. I stopped on the sidewalk for a second and looked at him, and he looked back at me, and wagged once, just once, with the composure of someone acknowledging a familiar face. "Hey, bud," I said quietly. Inside, Dora turned at the sound of her name. I hadn't said her name. I'd said the dog's name, but she turned anyway, instinctively. And for a half-second, we were both standing there, adjusting to the fact of each other, in a place that wasn't a doorway. "Lena." She said it in a different register than I'd heard from her before, a little softer. Like she was deciding whether to be surprised and deciding not to be. "I live 2 blocks up," I said, for no reason. "I know." A pause. "The flyer had the cross streets." "Right. Of course it did." The barista looked between us with the politely impatient expression of someone who has a line forming. We both ordered. By some logic that neither of us articulated, we both took our coffees to the same small table near the window. Dora wrapped her hands around her cup, both of them, the way you do when you need something to hold, and looked out at the street where Biscuit was performing his statue impression for a passing toddler. "What do you do?" she asked. Not small talk. She asked it the way she did most things, directly, like it was information she wanted rather than noise to fill space. "I'm an editor. Books. Literary fiction mostly." I nodded toward the street. "You restore things, I'm guessing?" She looked at me. "How?" "Your hands." And the note was written on what I think was a paper bag from a hardware store. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, more like a door opening a crack and then deciding to stay that way. "Houses mostly," she said. "Old ones, things people have given up on." She looked back out the window. "I restore them. I don't renovate." "Is there a difference?" "Renovating is replacing what doesn't work." She turned the cup slowly in her hands. "Restoring is understanding why it stopped working and fixing exactly that. Same bones. Just return to what they were meant to be." A pause. "It takes longer. It costs more usually, but you end up with something that's actually itself, not just something new wearing its address." I sat with that for a moment. "That's a good way to think about things," I said. I meant more than buildings. I think she knew. She looked at me with a directness that I was learning was just how she looked at things. Not aggressive, not calculating, just present, full attention, no performance of it. "You kept his bow tie on," she said, "while he was with you. It seemed important to him." "It is." A pause. She stopped. Started again. "I've had him since he was 8 weeks old. The bow tie was a thing that started as a joke and then became a thing. He doesn't like going out without it." "Does he choose it himself?" That got a sound from her. Not quite a laugh, but the shape of one, the breath of it. "No, but he notices when it's not there. Sits by the door and looks at you, very specifically." She looked at her coffee. "He had it on the morning he got out. I just put it on him. And then my phone rang about my mom, and I ran and I forgot to close the gate behind me. By the time She stopped, set the cup down. "By the time I could come back, he was gone." The way she said, "My phone rang about my mom." 6 words carrying about 4 years of weight. "I'm sorry," I said, "not about the dog." She nodded once, accepting it without deflecting it, which told me something too. We stayed at that table for an hour and a half. I was 40 minutes late to work. I sent my boss a message that said, "Running late, sorry," with no explanation. And she replied, "Okay," with a period, which meant she was fine. When I finally got up to leave, Dora stood too, untied Biscuit from the bike rack with the practiced ease of someone who's done it 1,000 times, and looked at me with that same level directness. "Thank you for the coffee," she said, "even though you didn't pay for mine." "You're welcome, even though I didn't." That was when I saw it clearly for the first time, the almost smile. It wasn't small exactly, it was just held, like something she'd learned to keep close to herself. But it was there, and it was real. And it was the most interesting thing I'd seen all week. I walked to work thinking about the word restoring. 3 weeks later, she left a note with the front desk of my building. Handwritten, brown paper bag again. "I still owe you dinner, if you want. No obligation, Dora." I looked at those 3 words for a long time. No obligation. The kind of phrase that means the opposite of what it says. That says very quietly, "I want this, but I'm giving you the exit because I don't know how to want things without building the exit in." I texted her, "I want." 2 words. She responded in 4 minutes with the name and address of a restaurant I'd walked past 100 times without going in. The restaurant was the kind of place that would be invisible from the outside to anyone not looking for it. A narrow door between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. A handwritten menu on a chalkboard inside, 6 tables, and a cook who worked alone in an open kitchen and seemed to regard customers with fond exasperation. The food was extraordinary. Dora had clearly been here many times. "You live nearby?" I asked. 6 blocks. I've been coming here since the owner opened it. She nodded toward the kitchen. He used to have a place in Seattle, closed it when his wife got sick, moved down here to be closer to family and opened this. A pause. Smaller, quieter, more his. I looked at the restaurant differently after that. She'd brought Biscuit, who was lying under the table with his chin on her foot, the exact mirror of what he'd done to me for 12 days. The loyalty of it was so complete and uncomplicated that it hurt a little to look at. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." No hesitation. "How long has your mom been sick?" She turned her cup of tea. No alcohol. She'd mentioned it without further detail, and considered the question with the same seriousness she gave everything. "On and off for 13 years, she said. "Since I was 22, this last episode was the worst one." A pause. "She's home now. She's going to be okay. But it was close this time, closer than before. I'm sorry. Thank you." She said it simply, the same way she'd accepted the apology at the coffee shop, not deflecting it, not minimizing it, not performing gratitude for it, just receiving it. "Do you have family here? Besides her?" "A brother in Chicago. He came when she was in the hospital. He's good in a crisis." A small pause. "I'm better in the aftermath. The long part. That's more my thing." I thought about what it meant to be better in the aftermath, to be the one who shows up for the long part, the part that isn't crisis anymore but isn't over either, the part where everyone else has gone home and the careful, patient, unremarkable work of recovery actually happens. "That's not a small thing," I said. She looked at me. That look again, direct, full, a door deciding to stay open. "No," she said, "it isn't." We stayed until the cook gently turned off the lights over the chalkboard menu, which we gathered was his signal that he'd like to close. Dora left a tip that I noticed was larger than the bill, quietly, without making anything of it. Outside on the sidewalk, Biscuit sniffed at a planter, and Dora stood with her hands in her jacket pockets, looking up at the sky. Portland's low November sky, the color of an old nickel, backlit somewhere behind the clouds. "I'm glad you turned around," she said. To the sky, not to me, or to both of us. It was hard to tell. "Me too," I said. She looked over then, quickly, like she hadn't quite meant to say that out loud and was checking the reception. I held her gaze evenly. She looked away first. "Good night, Lena." "Good night." I watched her walk away down the street. Not because I was watching her, I told myself. Because Biscuit turned back to look at me once from half a block away, which seemed significant, and then turned forward again. We fell into a routine without planning it, and without naming it. She stopped at the coffee shop on mornings she didn't have an early job, around 8:15. I started arriving at 8:15 too, which involved waking up earlier, which I told myself was about the coffee. I learned her patterns the way you learn the grammar of a language you're starting to speak, not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day the structure is just there and you've stopped noticing you're learning it. She drummed her fingers on the table when she was thinking. Always the same sequence: index finger, middle finger, ring finger, thumb. A private rhythm, repeated exactly. I learned to spot it from across the room before she'd even registered that she was doing it. She tilted her head slightly to the left, just the left, never the right, when she was genuinely listening to something. Not to indicate she was listening. She did it without knowing she was doing it. It was the body telling the truth when the face was still deciding. She never finished certain sentences. The ones about her mom, not the facts about her mom's illness, which she'd give clearly and without flinching, but the sentences about what it had cost her. about the person she'd been before she became someone who was good in the aftermath. Those sentences would start and then just stop, the end left hanging in the air between us, and she'd pick up her cup or look at the window and the conversation would move on. I didn't push. I'd learned, in those coffee shop mornings, that Dora told things at her own pace. The pace was real. Rushing it would be like trying to speed up a restoration. You'd end up with something that looked done before it was, and it wouldn't hold. I had my own equivalent silences, the ones about Claire, about what it had meant to hear that I'd packed myself too small for love to fit, about the 2 years since, which I'd spent being competent and fine and quietly, efficiently lonely, in a way I was only now beginning to admit to myself because Dora was, without trying, making the silence in my apartment very loud. One morning she arrived at the coffee shop with plaster dust in her hair. She'd clearly come straight from a job, and sat down and ordered and didn't mention it. And I didn't mention it either, and there was something in the comfortable silence of two people who don't need to explain themselves to each other that I recognized as something I hadn't felt in a long time. I filed that away too, in the drawer, next to the note about the bow tie. It was a Sunday afternoon when the nature of things shifted. Not all the way, but enough that I felt it. She'd come by to look at a water-damaged baseboard in my hallway that I'd mentioned in passing, because she'd offered and I'd said yes before I had a chance to apply any strategy to the decision. She was crouching in the hallway, running her thumb along the wood with a focused attention that she brought to all physical things. And I was leaning in the kitchen doorway, watching her work and pretending to read emails on my phone, when she said, without looking up, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The apartment." She paused. "It's very organized, careful, but there's nothing on the walls." She sat back on her heels and looked up at me. "Why aren't there things on the walls?" I put my phone down. It wasn't an intrusive question, the way she asked it. It was a question that knew it was going somewhere real and was giving me the choice of whether to go there. "I keep meaning to," I said, "and I keep not doing it." "Why?" I could have said something deflecting. She'd have let me. Instead, I heard myself say, "I think I've been waiting to feel like this is actually mine, like I'm actually here, like I'm not—" I stopped. "Like you're not just passing through," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Yeah," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the baseboard. "This is a straightforward fix," she said. "The damage doesn't go deep. Just the surface needs work." A pause. "I can show you how to do it yourself if you want. It's not hard once you know where to start." I thought she might still be talking about the wood. "I'd like that," I said. She showed me. We worked side by side in the narrow hallway for 2 hours, and she was patient in the way of someone who is genuinely good at explaining things, who doesn't get frustrated at mistakes, who understands that people learn by doing and not by being told. By the end of it, the baseboard was repaired, and I had plaster on my sleeve, and there was a specific kind of comfortable quiet between us that I had stopped pretending didn't mean anything. After, she sat on my couch with a cup of coffee, Biscuit's head in her lap, his paws in the air, and I sat in the chair across from her, and neither of us was in a hurry to be anywhere. "I'm going to have to move," she said, out of nowhere, looking at the window. I had not been expecting that. "What happened?" "Building's being sold. The new owners want to develop the lot. I have 2 months." A pause. "My mom is still recovering. I can't ask her to change anything right now, and I can't move too far from her. So I'm looking for something in her neighborhood. Ladd's Addition? Near there, yeah. You'll find something. It's a good neighborhood. Probably." She didn't seem uncertain about that. She seemed uncertain about something else. "I've been in my building for 6 years," she said. "I know every creak in the floor. I know which windows stick in August and which ones rattle in January." She turned her cup slowly. "I know which neighbors actually want to chat and which ones just need you to wave." A pause. "I know where everything is. That's a hard thing to give up." Yeah. She looked down at Biscuit. Her fingers found his ear automatically. I got used to it, to this neighborhood, to the routine of, to the... She stopped. The sentence stayed unfinished. I watched her. The slight downward tilt of her head. The deliberate stillness she held herself in when she was feeling something she hadn't decided to say yet. I waited. She didn't finish the sentence. She looked up, and there was something in the look, unguarded. For just a second, a window left open. And then it was gone, and she was looking at her coffee again. "It'll be an adjustment," she said. "Yes," I agreed. After she left that night, Biscuit's leash still visible on the hook by her door from where I stood in my hallway. I stayed in my apartment with the lights off for a while, sitting in the chair by the window, thinking about unfinished sentences and what lives in the space after them. 3 days later, Dora texted me at 11:07 p.m. "Are you awake?" I was sitting at my desk with a manuscript I'd read the same paragraph of 4 times without retaining any of it. My coffee was cold. Biscuit's empty food bowl was still on the kitchen floor because I hadn't returned it yet, which I also wasn't examining. "I am. What's up?" A pause, longer than her usual response time. "Can I come over?" No explanation, no context. In 3 months of Dora, 3 months of measured, careful, nothing wasted Dora, this was the most unguarded thing she'd said to me directly. "Of course," I wrote. "Come now if you want." She arrived in 15 minutes with Biscuit on the leash and the face she'd had the very first morning she knocked on my door. Not the held face, not the composed one, the one underneath. The under eyes were different from hospital different now. They were the under eyes of someone who'd been crying, or had been very close to it and was still close. "My mom told me something tonight," she said, still standing in the doorway, like she needed to say the first part before she could come in. "About my dad. He died when I was 19. Lung cancer." A breath. She told me there was something he'd said to her before he died, something he'd asked her to do or not do, that she'd been holding on to for almost 10 years. She thought she was protecting me. She thought I wasn't ready. She stopped. She decided tonight that I was ready. I stepped back and held the door open and didn't say anything. She came in. We didn't sit on the couch. I don't know whose decision that was. It just didn't seem right. We sat on the floor of the living room, against the base of the couch, and Biscuit settled between us like he'd been told to, and Dora told me what her mother had said. I won't repeat what it was. It isn't my story. But it was about the kind of love that a person carries in silence for a long time. Not from absence, not from not caring, but from a specific kind of fear that the love, if expressed, would cost something it couldn't afford. Her father had loved someone for years and had been afraid to say so fully because he'd believed the saying would change something that he needed to stay intact. And then he'd run out of time to say it, and he'd asked her mother to carry it for him. Her mother had carried it for 10 years. When Dora finished telling me, we sat quietly. Biscuit had moved and put his head in her lap. She was running her hand over his ears in long, slow strokes. The apartment was very still. Outside, the Portland drizzle had become actual rain, hitting the window in the irregular rhythm of November. 10 years, she said finally, quietly. 10 years is a long time to carry something like that. It is. A pause. I keep thinking about how much time we spend... She stopped. Started again. How much time we spend holding things that could change everything if we just say them. And we don't. Because we're protecting someone, or we don't know how, or we're afraid of what it would cost. She was still looking at the dog. And then we run out of time, and we hand it to someone else to carry. She wasn't talking about her father anymore. I knew it. She knew I knew it. I waited. "Lena, I'm here." She lifted her eyes from Biscuit, found mine. "I don't know how to do this," she said. The voice was different, stripped of the careful measurement, just the actual voice underneath, the one that didn't know how yet. I've spent a long time not doing this, getting good at not doing this. I know, I said. Me too. I'm not. She stopped. Tried again. I'm not someone who. Another stop. A short exhale. I'm not easy, she said finally. I'm not easy to know, and I know that about myself. I work too much, and I go quiet when things are hard, and I don't always have words for what I'm feeling, and I don't. She looked at her hands. I don't let people in easily. I know, I said again, and you're still here. I looked at her. Dora, I said. I went home after you took Biscuit, and I stood in the kitchen and looked at his empty food bowl for 10 minutes. A pause. I've been at the coffee shop at 8:15 for 6 weeks. I moved my schedule around an entire hour. I made a small gesture at the apartment. I haven't moved the food bowl. Something happened on her face. Not the almost smile. Something more open than that. Something that looked like relief and fear arriving at the same time and not knowing what to do with the collision. You got used to it too, she said. Quiet, almost to herself. I got used to it too. I paused. To the routine, to the coffee shop, to the... I stopped deliberately, echoing her unfinished sentence from 3 days ago, and her eyes came fully to mine. She understood. I watched her understand it. The almost smile finally arrived, fully, wholly, without reservation. The real one, the one underneath the one she showed to the world, that I'd seen only in pieces over 3 months. At the coffee shop that first morning, in the narrow restaurant with the lights going out, in a hallway covered in plaster dust. This version was complete, and it was the most disarming thing I'd seen in 2 years. Lena. I'm scared. I know, me too. But you're saying to try anyway. I'm saying that it feels right to me, right now, on this floor. I looked at the space between us. We don't have to know what it is yet. We just have to not pretend it isn't something. She looked at the floor, at the space, at Biscuit, who was watching us both with the alert patience of a creature who has understood for some time what was happening and is very glad we've caught up. Then she reached out her hand, the scarred, careful, capable hands, and set it in mine. Palm up, an offering, not a demand. I turned my hand over and held it. That was the moment. That was the moment when everything that had started with a wet bow tie and a bag of instant ramen on a November sidewalk became something else, something that didn't have a name yet but didn't need one. We stayed on that floor until almost 2 in the morning, talking about all of it. The things she'd been holding, the things I'd been holding, about Claire, about her father, about what it meant to have gotten so good at managing your life that you'd managed the love out of it, about the specific loneliness of efficiency. She talked more than I'd ever heard her talk, and her voice was different in the dark, looser, the measurement loosened, and I understood that this was what she'd been containing all along, and that it had cost her. Biscuit fell asleep with all 4 paws in the air, completely surrendered. When she finally stood to go, she stood in my doorway with the real face, wholly, without the held version layered over it. And she said, "Thank you for opening the door that night." I knew she wasn't talking about the apartment door. "Thank you for knocking," I said. She looked at me for 1 more moment. Then she and Biscuit went down the hall, and I stood in my doorway and listened to the sound of her key in her lock, and the click of it closing. I went back inside. The apartment was quiet, but it was different, quiet. 5 months later. Dora didn't move to her mom's neighborhood. She moved to the same floor as me, apartment 4F, 6 doors down, which she spent 3 weeks restoring before she brought a single box in. I heard her in there in the evenings, the sounds of careful work, And I would sometimes stand in my own hallway listening to the knock of a hammer and the long silence between strokes and think about what she'd said, about understanding why something stopped working before you tried to fix it. "Not renovating," she made a point of saying, the first evening she let me see it. "Restoring." Her apartment has a personality that mine is still figuring out how to have. Tools organized on pegboards in the second bedroom she'd converted into a workshop. Every wrench and chisel in its place, the order of someone who uses everything and knows where it lives. In the main room, wood surfaces, soft light, a leather reading chair in the corner that looks like it came from an estate sale and has been in exactly the right amount of use. A plant on the windowsill, wide leaves, deep green, thriving in a way that looks effortless but isn't. She knew the name of the plant. She'd had it for 5 years. It had survived 2 moves and a period when she'd had to leave it with a neighbor for 6 weeks because of her mom. "How did it survive that?" I asked. "Good bones," she said, "and someone who knew how to take care of it." My apartment changed too. Slowly, then not so slowly. It started with Biscuit's food bowl. I never returned it, and then a second one appeared in my kitchen. And then Dora started leaving things. A book on my nightstand because she'd finished it and thought I'd want it. A jar of the good sea salt she used because I'd mentioned liking it. A phone charger for the type I didn't have. Small things, practical things. And then a photo. I don't fully remember the night she took it. It was late, 2 in the morning or close to it, and I was reading a manuscript at my desk with my glasses on and my hair down, and she'd been reading in the leather chair she'd started leaving in the corner of my living room. And at some point, there was the sound of her phone camera. I looked up. "Sorry," she said, not looking sorry. "You could ask. You would have moved." She was right. I would have. I would have straightened up and taken my glasses off and been a different version of myself. She'd taken the unguarded version. The one at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and a manuscript and reading glasses I'd worn since I was 23 that I thought made me look like a librarian's slightly scatterbrained cousin. It's on the refrigerator now, held up with a sunflower magnet she found at a thrift store in Selwood. I walk past it every morning. Every morning, it tells me something about who I've been letting myself be. Dora's mom is named Ruth. I met her on a Sunday afternoon in late July when Dora said, with the naturalness of someone stating an obvious fact, "I told my mom you'd come to dinner Sunday. Not, would you like to, not if you're not busy?" Just the given fact of it. I said Sunday worked. Ruth lives in a small house in Ladd's Addition with a garden that she tends herself and a kitchen that smells permanently like garlic and something sweet. And she met me at the door with both hands extended and an expression on her face that said she had been waiting to put a face to something she'd been hearing about for a while. She has Dora's eyes. Not the color. Dora's are darker. But the quality of them. The way they see things directly without being unkind about it. She kept me in the kitchen with her while she finished cooking, and Dora and Biscuit disappeared into the garden, and Ruth asked me questions about my work with the genuine curiosity of someone who reads and loves books and wants to know what it's like to be inside that world. "Dora doesn't talk much about herself," Ruth said at one point, not quite a non sequitur, stirring something on the stove. "It's not that she's private. She takes up a certain amount of space, and she's decided what that space is, and she stays in it." She paused. "She talked about you early, more than she thought she was, I think." I didn't know what to do with that. I said, "She's been very good to me." Ruth turned and looked at me with that same specific seriousness, the seriousness of someone who can tell when a statement is insufficient to the thing it's describing. "She's happy," Ruth said simply. "She doesn't use that word. But I'm her mother. I know what it looks like." Over coffee after dinner, she put her hand over mine on the table, just for a moment, the same quiet gesture I recognized from Dora, and said, "Thank you for looking after her while I couldn't." I started to say it was nothing. She shook her head gently. "It was," she said. "Let it be." So I let it be. Dora still drums her fingers when she's thinking. Index, middle, ring, thumb. I recognize it from across the room, from across the coffee shop, through the wall of my apartment on evenings when I can hear her working in her kitchen. She still tilts her head to the left when she's really listening. I've started timing my more important sentences to land when her head is at that angle. I think she knows this. She hasn't said anything about it. She still doesn't finish certain sentences. But the sentences have changed. They're not about the past anymore. About before her dad died, about before her mom first got sick, about before she learned to contain herself to a certain size. They're about the future now, about things she wants. The house she's going to restore one day. Not a commission, her own. The places she wants to go. The life she's figuring out how to have more room in. Those sentences she leaves unfinished differently. Not because she's protecting herself from them. Because they're big and she's still figuring out the shape. I've learned to wait for them. I have time. This morning, I left our building at 8:10, not 8:20, not even 8:15. 8:10. Because I wanted to be there when she arrived. I had 2 coffees and biscuit walking between my feet, his navy bow tie perfectly knotted. It's the 4th one since November. The original went to a frame shop last month. Dora saw me do it and didn't say anything, which was its own kind of answer. She was at the window table, hands wrapped around her cup, looking out at the street with the expression she gets when she's working through a problem in her mind. Not worried, just occupied, like a machine running quietly. She saw me while I was still on the sidewalk outside the glass, and she gave me that smile. That particular one, the whole one, the one that still looks like it's surprised by itself every single time. And I felt it in the way you feel things when you've stopped pretending you don't. I pushed open the door, set her second coffee down, sat across from her. Biscuit went immediately under the table and turned in one circle and settled, as if this were the only possible conclusion to any morning. Dora looked at me over her cup with those steady, dark eyes. "You turned around," she said. Same words she'd said before. Different morning, different weight. "I did," I said. 3 steps. 3 steps. A pause. The coffee shop was warm. Outside the window, the street was doing what Portland streets do on winter mornings, existing in their particular gray-bright way, the light low and diffuse, and somehow making everything look deliberate. "Good," she said. "You have a whole theory about how your life is going to go. It can be a good theory, efficient and correct and well-constructed. It can account for most things. It can keep you safe and functional and fine. It just can't account for a dog in a bow tie standing in the rain looking at you with completely unearned faith. It can't account for the person who put that bow tie on with care every morning until one morning the gate was left open. It can't account for the things you weren't looking for. Sometimes what the theory is missing isn't a better plan. Sometimes it's just the willingness to turn around. That's where this story ends. With a coffee at 8:10. With biscuit under the table, with a smile that still surprises itself, with a theory about life that had to get a little broken before it could get honest. If this story reached you somewhere, and I hope it did, do me a favor, hit the like button. It's a small thing, but it's what helps stories like this find the people who need them. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. New stories come out every week here. Stories that stay with you because they're about things we actually carry, things we hold back, things we turn around for. Hit the bell too, so you don't miss what's coming. And in the comments, I want to know. Do you believe in encounters that only look like accidents? That moment, a dog, a wrong turn, a sentence someone said, a door you almost didn't open. That turned out to be the thing? Tell me what yours was. I read every single one. Until the next story. End. I adopted a lost dog, but ended up finding more than just his owner.